You're listening to the Autism Weekly podcast. Each week, we share community voices and bring light to stories that increase awareness, acceptance, equity, access, and inclusion. If you haven't already, subscribe to join the Autism Weekly family. I'm your host, Jeff Skibitsky. This week, we're joined by Dr. Luke Beardon, a renowned autism advocate, researcher, and educator with over 3 decades of experience in the field. Dr. Beardon is a passionate champion for autistic individuals' rights and has dedicated his career to addressing inequalities and fostering understanding. He's an award-winning teacher, author of several books on autism, and a leader in postgraduate autism education. Welcome to the podcast, Dr. Luke Beardon.
Thank you very much, Jeff. Thanks for having me.
Well, just reading and kind of understanding your background, you've put a lot of time, a lot of energy, which means that there's probably a lot of passion that has driven to where you are right now. What led you to really kind of get that career going in autism advocacy and research?
Do you know what? It's one of those things that keeps me awake at night. I sometimes wake up thinking, oh, what if I am not motivated to carry on tomorrow? But it's never happened. Sometimes you get a little bit worried about, you're just so desperate for change. You're so desperate to get things moving for the autism population, for the autistic population in the right way. You're so desperate. And sometimes that change is just too slow and it's frustrating. But it doesn't mean to say you lack any motivation. I fell into autism, as so many professionals do, and academics and people who work in the profession. I was at school. I was 14, and we were supposed to be doing this kind of work experience with the army, and I wasn't very keen on the army. So they were like, well, if you're not going to do this like the rest of the school, and I was always the odd one out at school, they were like, right, you need to go and do something. So I ended up doing voluntary work at a hospital, actually, a school, which was part of a hospital. It was what was called then a special needs school, and just working with very little people who were all autistic. And I just absolutely fell in love with this particular population at aged 14, and never really looked back. So I was, as soon as I could, after I left university, I became a grade 1 support worker, supporting autistic adults with additional needs and learning disabilities, and have had any number of jobs in the autism field. Still very much see myself as a grade 1 support worker, but my current title is I'm a senior lecturer in autism at Sheffield Hallam University.
Well, I mean, your story, I feel like I resonate so much with that, is that you go into not really even knowing or understanding the population that is going to educate you, that is going to give you passion and drive throughout your life, and it just sticks. It's something that kind of continuously evolves. And the autistic child, autistic adult is somebody who, at least for me, has always been a part of my life for the last 30 years. It sounds like it's been the same for you. What has changed in the field over that time? Because there has been a lot, even conceptually, as far as, how the world is looking at autism, autism treatment, autism acceptance, empowerment. It's all changed. What have you seen?
Yeah, no, that's an amazing question. And there's that kind of juxtaposition between, or almost contradiction between, you could on the one hand say, well, almost nothing has changed compared to what we might like. And yet there's been enormous conceptual changes within certain minority groups, I would suggest. So I think we're talking about significant minority groups, including the autistic population themselves, actually led by the autistic population themselves. And then you've got much bigger groups who are still a long way behind in terms of conceptualization of autism. So I wrote a chapter in a book, what's it called? 30 years of, I'm just looking at my bookcase, 30 years of social change. And it was about what has actually changed. So within the last 3 decades, there has been major step changes in terms of moving slowly, embryonically, from a medical model of autism, i.e. autism is seen as some kind of impairment, disorder, so on, more through to the social model and the neurodiversity movement, which is saying, look, being autistic is a natural variation of neurodiversity, there's a minority group whose brains work in a slightly different way compared to everybody else. And actually, there's a huge disparity between those world views. I'm absolutely 100% behind the neurodiversity movement and social model of disability, but you're fighting against clinical manuals, for example, the DSM and the ICD, which still absolutely categorically places autism within that medical model and says, in a comparative model compared to the perceived norm, you as an autistic individual are lesser somehow. And I
Mhm.
absolutely fundamentally reject that. But I still think that that narrative is rife within clinical circles and professional circles. So there's an awful long way to go, but the trajectory is going in the right direction, I would say.
Yeah, and I mean, and I hope to be able to get into a little bit about the idea of, and I'm gonna frame it almost treating versus empowering. As a neurotypical person, I always want to be empowered. If there's something I need to be able to work on to be able to achieve my personal goal, I want to work with somebody to be able to make sure I can master that. And I think that that concept to me exists no matter who you are, no matter what your skill sets are, and no matter where your challenges lie. So I hope to be able to get there. But what you're talking about over that 30 years, a good kind of base to kind of start our conversation, I think, is on the way that we're looking at some of the sensitivities and some of the what we would, I guess, call stereotypical behaviors and the way that people are processing some of the inputs and outputs of the world around them. Maybe that's where we start, because 30 years ago we tried to stop all of that and basically tell somebody you can't flap your hands. Rocking is bad. Like, I mean, we went through that whole process. And now we're starting to learn maybe that isn't the case, and maybe somebody needs to be able to regulate differently. Is that kind of the thought process that you're talking about as far as concept?
It's definitely one of them. And when I first started working in the autism field, the sensory side of being autistic was almost completely ignored. Like I remember engaging with a family. I was supporting a young man to go into residential, and as a child he was pre-verbal. He wasn't able to speak, he wasn't able to communicate effectively. But one of the things his parents nabbed me. They were basically like, right, you work for the National Autistic Society, you know about autism. Which I was like, whoa, hold on a minute. But they were like, no, we really want to pick your brains. And one of the things they were saying is, like, when our child was younger, he refused to be clean, he refused to have a shower. They didn't have a bath, they had a shower. So whenever we tried to pop him in the shower, he would do everything he could to escape from that environment. What, so Mr. Awesome, why did he do that? And I was thinking, oh God, I don't know. Um, and I got to know this guy really well. And he said, well, it's obvious, isn't it? And I was like, what do you mean? He said, well, it hurt. I was like, and I asked him to explain, and he said, well, when I'm in the shower, I can feel every single droplet of water like a pinprick. So standing under a shower is just like absolute torture. He said, I remember him saying, I might be autistic, I'm not stupid, I will avoid that. And I went back to his parents and I reported this. And they said to me, so we're probably talking about, I'm trying to think, early 90s. And they said they were horrified. They said, so basically, we were being allowed to torture our son and nobody told us. And then they said, is that right? Is that what autistic people experience? And I remember so significantly that conversation. And I was thinking, I'm in this autism field, I don't know the answer to that question. So I became absolutely obsessed and determined to engage with the autistic population, to hear those stories, find out if this is a real thing that's commonplace amongst the autistic population. And if so, why isn't anybody talking about it? And that there was another individual working in the field, still is, called Professor Olga Bogdashina, and she was absolutely the forefront of the whole sensory side of things. But moving on from work in the 70s by people like Dr. Jean Ayres and so on, but specific to autism, Olga was absolutely a shining light. And so I've got to pay tribute to her. But I was so obsessed with trying to, and it just blew my mind, absolutely blew my mind. It still does to this day. Every single autistic individual that you will engage with will have a different sensory profile compared to another autistic person, and diametrically opposed often to the non-autistic population, which is why it's absolutely essential that we have a good understanding of what that sensory profile is, not least that the individual needs to understand their own sensory profile, because you don't know what you don't know. So like,
Mhm.
so many autistic adults who have a very late identification, I have these conversations with, and they're like, well, what do you mean other people don't hear electricity. Well, everybody hears electricity, don't they? It's like, no, actually, most people, really? I just assumed everybody did. And I assume, and those assumptions are often incredibly problematic to live with, because you just assume that you're being a bit rubbish compared to everybody else. So if you say, look, I don't know, well, here's a real life example. So we know that the proprioception, for example, so fine motor coordination, can be extraordinarily difficult for some autistic individuals. So therefore handwriting can be physically and emotionally a painful process. In which case, that's hugely disadvantaging those individuals compared to, say, for example, touch typing. If those individuals live their life feeling inferior, because they just assume they're rubbish compared to everyone else, as opposed to, no, this is a real thing. You're actually processing that sensation in a completely different way compared to those other individuals. It's not that they're just putting it up with better than you. It's actually being processed. You used the word process. Absolute genius. It's all about, autism is all about differences in processing, cognitive and sensory processing. That's what I think anyway. If you wanted to define autism, I attempted to do it in 2017, I think, in my first book. But it's all about processing, that qualitative different way of processing information, including sensory information, and getting to grips with all of the different, so you 5 primary senses, and then your proprioceptive, your vestibulosensory, and interoception, all these other senses, and working out what your sensory profile might be at any given time, because it will change over time, change from one environment to the next. Unless we know what that is, rhetorical question, but how do we know what support that individual might require? And how does the individual themselves know what support that they should be offered or required, or how should we adapt the environment? I don't know how long we've been in the podcast so far, but people that know me, but he hasn't mentioned his self-professed golden equation. So I came up with what I refer to as the golden equation, which is very arrogant. But anyway, I think, so my golden equation is autism plus environment equals outcome. And because I don't think autism equals anything. Autism just equals autism, but in and of itself, it doesn't tell us anything about what's going on. And autism doesn't lead to any particular outcome apart from staying autistic. However, we do know that most autistic individuals are at a massive disadvantage and face huge challenges in their day-to-day living. So why is that? Because we can't put it down to just being autistic. So that's when I came up with autism plus environment equals outcome. Now, if we want the outcome to be positive, we need to understand the environment. And in this context, for the sake of this podcast, we need to understand the sensory environment. So if autism plus a poor sensory environment equals distress, discomfort, dysregulation, all of those sorts of things, you can't change somebody being autistic, nor should you want to. So the only thing, if you believe in the equation, and I do, the only thing left in that equation to change is the environment. And we don't know what to change in that environment unless we understand the sensory processing of that individual.
Absolutely. And I mean, I couldn't imagine going through life where that environment wouldn't be changed to adapt to some of my particular needs. If everything was a challenge in my life and everybody kept telling me, no, you have to do it this way, even though that's going to make, I don't know, 16 hours of my day extremely stressful, hard, challenging, exhausting, I don't know that I would feel like I would ever be empowered. I don't think that I could ever achieve the goals that I want. And I think what you're saying is so important, because even if you are trying to be able to take on new challenges, trying to develop new skills, new ways to interact with the environment, is that you still need to have a respite. You still need some modifications of that occurring to be able to have time for yourself.
I'm so glad you said respite, because it begins with R. So I came up, I like things in sets of 3. So I came up with 3 R's, the concept of the 3 R's. And that's recognition, regulation, and then resilience. And I'm determined to go through these because there's a purpose. So recognition in this context, recognition of what your sensory needs might be. Regulation, so regulating the environment to make sure your sensory needs are actually met, which then means you stop having to be resilient. I hate this idea. We've got to make autistic people more resilient so that they can cope. No, if they have to be resilient and cope, then we're doing something wrong. Surely we need to sort the environment out so they're not at that. We don't expect anybody else to have to put up with sensory distress. And trust me, it is absolute distress. There's incredibly positive things about sensory experiences. There's some awful things about sensory experiences as well, in terms of processing, for example, of pain. So you might, if you are, I don't know, hyperacusis, and you process the noise of a dog barking as acute pain, then that doesn't seem very fair to me. And if people are saying, well, no, it's, you just need to get used to dogs barking, that's just basically saying you need to get used to pain. Nobody should be put in that situation, as opposed to, okay, how are we going to operate a system whereby you've got your earphones on, we know where there's going to be dogs, we're going to try and avoid those, so you don't have to build up that resilience. So those 3 R's, I think, are super important. And just going back to the physical movement, so I was talking about proprioception, but vestibular, so you were talking essentially about stimming and self-regulation and those sorts of things. And it used to be the case of, sit on your hands, or don't flower, whatever. Actually, if you have got what's called vestibular, like hyposensitivity to vestibular functioning, so there's hypo and hyposensitivity in all of these. And if you're actually I always analogize it with, imagine you're on a boat and you're on a lake somewhere, doesn't really matter where. Why am I? It literally doesn't make any difference. Anyway, and the lake is nice and still. You're stood on the deck of the boat. Cool, no problem at all. Then the wind picks up and the boat starts rocking. You will start rocking with that boat in order to feel physically stable.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So you need that rhythmical movement in order to not feel like you're out of balance. Now, I suspect very, very strongly, and this isn't research, but it is discussed a lot with all of the autistic people that I'm lucky enough to know. Actually, if you're undersensitive, if your vestibular sensory system is undersensitive, in a static environment, you feel the need to move. You have to move. You have to stim. You have to rock. You have to make those movements in order to feel stable. So to deny the individual the opportunity to do that can then lead to extraordinary amounts of distress, stroke, trauma. So that's yet another reason why we have to have a really deep understanding of what's actually going on.
Yeah, and so this, when we originally started talking, is that I had in my mind that you were a teacher, researcher, advocate, in that order. So that's oftentimes how we think about it. Now, talking with you, I almost think it's flipped. I think that you're advocate first. You're hearing, you're listening to what people, especially those that are experiencing it, are going through their life, and what's important to them and how they're feeling the environment around them. And then it almost turns into, well, let me research this to get a better understanding, to get more information. And then you're a teacher almost last. And we don't always go that process, but I love that, because the individual is the one who's able to inform us on all of these sensory needs and sensitivities, and what they need to be able to be functioning in the way that they want to be in the world around them. And if we don't listen, we get lost. So when we're talking at school, when we're talking in the workplace, is it the same approach that people need to have, where I need to listen first before I start telling somebody how they have to do their job or how they have to learn?
So I think there's something around. So it goes back to what I was saying earlier about understanding of sensory profiles. If an individual themselves doesn't have a good understanding of their own sensory profile, it's like, how do you know that you're colorblind? Because you don't know what other people can see, or how they, like, if you don't know that, and you don't know what you don't know. Now, some autistic individuals are brilliant in terms of understanding their sensory, and some people are really, really good at understanding their own children's sensory environment. And any parent listening to this will know, yes, my child is, I don't know, sensitive to, I don't know, the noise of, well, a fairly obvious one, the noise of a siren going by, and they can hear the siren 5 miles away. And we know that because Granny sometimes phones, says there's a siren on its way. It's like, yeah, we know he's already hiding under the bed with his ear defenders on. Do you know what I mean? So those sorts of experiences, those observations, some of them are more obvious, like pain, for example. It's like you literally had a limb hanging off and you didn't seem to notice. Which we know in terms of hyposensitivity to pain, which is unbelievably important to recognize. And within the same person, there's often that what you might regard as oversensitivity. I don't think it's oversensitivity. It's just that incredible vulnerability to different types of pain. And you might have that, as I say, in the same person. So there are some individuals who have got all sorts of expertise in these areas. However, that will change over time. That doesn't remain static. It won't be the same from one person to the next. So for me, it's really interesting what you said about teaching. Whenever I'm trying to engage with audiences about this, I will be very overt. I cannot teach you about sensory experiences because they are infinite in design. Like, and one individual sensory profile will almost categorically not look like somebody else's. However, what I can do is utilize the thousands of autistic individuals that I've engaged with over the years to enable you to broaden your horizons, to recognize what might be going on, as opposed to only understanding the sensory world through your own very limited lens. And once you open up your eyes to things like synesthesia, so where one sense is processed as if it's a different sense. So I don't know, somebody that allowed, well, here's an example of chromesthesia. Chromesthesia is where sound is triggered by, color is triggered by sound. So there's an example. I know an individual for whom if a door slams, he can't hear it, but he sees a flash of blue light. And we only discovered this when he was, we were out drinking one night, and a door slammed, and then he was blinking like this. I was like, what are you doing, mate? He's like, oh, it's that flash of blue light. It's really annoying, isn't it? And I'm like, what flash of blue light? I said, that just happened. And then it was like, hold on a minute. And I said, you know, when you see a door and can you hit, is that, he said, no, that's the flash, as if everybody, now that's absolutely fascinating. And I often wonder how much more common things like synesthesia are, but we don't know to look for it. But it is super important if you've got a child, say, for example, in the classroom, and all of a sudden they put their hands over their ears, and you're thinking, well, you know, there's no noise. It might not be. It might be a smell. It might be movement. It might be all sorts of other things if it's synesthesia. And if we don't know that, then we need to find out, because it then develops into our sensory profile. So I think the broader your horizons are, it's really interesting, the whole concept of empathy. I'm really interested in this. I wrote about this in 2008. I called it cross-neurological theory of mind, which is a rubbish word. Damien Milton then came up with a much better concept of double empathy, the double empathy problem. Now, I don't think you can empathize with other people's sensory experiences if that is a far cry from your own. But that doesn't mean to say you shouldn't appreciate it, recognize it, understand it, and absolutely accept it. And it's the acceptance that so many autistic people find other people are reluctant to do, because people are very introverted about their own lens. It's like, well, it doesn't hurt me, so therefore it can't really be that bad for you. Actually, it can.
Yeah, and I think that's where it comes in, is that as a parent, it's looking at, you're going to have competing priorities. Is that for every parent, their goal for their child, and then this is me just kind of putting a very big generalization out there, is that they grow up happy, they grow up in healthy relationships, and that they're able to accomplish their own personal goals. There are probably times where your sensory needs are going to compete with some of those life goals. And where's the balance with that as a parent, as far as being able to understand, okay, well, I need to make sure that I am giving my child what they need based off understanding their sensory profile. But I also see my child that is wanting to be in some of these environments because of the other things that are available there. And what is the balance for a parent at that point, and how do they make those very tough decisions?
So you're absolutely spot on. It's all about balance, isn't it? And it's about, you know, how far do you push yourself or your child outside of their comfort zone in order to experience something new, to maybe then go, okay, well, that's caused me a certain degree of anxiety, but now that I've been exposed to it, that might reduce my anxiety next time, which can broaden my horizons. But it is all about balance. I'm massively into the concept of energy. And I've written about this. I've broken it down into 9 different types of energy. We always think of energy as like, well, it's just how many spoons have you got on a day-to-day basis. I think we should be measuring energy, like literally, like I don't know, let's put you on the spot. Talking to you, like, you're brilliant to talk to. I don't really like human beings very much, but most of them. So most people that I have to engage with socially, I just find are a real drain. You're actually, maybe because we're talking about one of my favorite subjects, but I'm sure you're just a lovely human being anyway. Now I can measure and do measure who are mood hoovers and who give me social energy. Same with emotional energy, same with physical energy, same with mental energy, same with communication energy, so on and so forth. And sensory energy is part of that as well. Now, all of those things have to be balanced so that when you're going into environment, you've actually got the requisite energy at that moment in time in order to be able to engage. And we tend to think of energy in terms of how much sleep have you had, or like I was going to say I'm a triathlete. I'm not a triathlete at all. I do triathlons. If I do a long distance triathlon on a Saturday and I'm out racing for 15 hours, nobody would expect me to get up on the Sunday and do it all again. They would be perfectly, I assume, happy to go for me to say I'm wrecked. I can't. And they would, what they wouldn't say is, well, you did it yesterday, so you must be able to do it again today. And yet we put autistic children into that very same situation where they expend a huge amount of energy engaging in a new environment or going to a kid's party or whatever it might be. And it's like, well, you've done it now, so therefore you can do it forever. And that isn't the case, because your energy levels will change almost on a minute by minute, but certainly on a day-to-day basis. And I think we as in society need to be much better, first of all, in terms of being cognizant and understanding that, but then also charting our own energies and our children's energies and people that we care for, and literally chart it. You can literally do it in order to then move forward and start working out, okay, how are we now going to use our units of energy that we've got on a Sunday? Which direction are we going to point those in?
And in those situations, when you're talking about, and I'll say maybe it's a child wants to go to a sporting event. They love to watch sports on TV, but the noise, the sound, all of the inputs of just, the spontaneous inputs that occur at a sporting event maybe throw them off. They want to be able to get there. Are there things that parents should be looking at as far as after they understand their child's sensory profile? This is what I could do beforehand to help my child be successful. This is what I do at the event to help my child be successful. This is what I need to do after the event. I mean, is there always this kind of the planning? It seems so important, but is there always kind of that process of understanding that there are numerous parts to this sensory diet or the way that we're going through the sensory experience that I need to be aware of? It's not just that one thing, it's the entire journey.
Yeah, and that is, you're absolutely right. That journey could be 6 months, not just 6 hours, like literally, for some individuals. And knowledge is power, right? So again, it goes back to how aware are we of the sorts of things that are likely to cause overwhelm. So crowds, people always seem to go for the obvious ones, crowds and noise. Some people, it's like crowds and noise. Once you got beyond 100 people, it doesn't make any difference. Like literally, it's like 100 people, 1,000 people, 1,000,000 people, literally doesn't make any difference. So actually, that level of overwhelm is maybe not as important as it might appear to be for that child. But what is really important is what they're wearing, so that if they're being brushed past another human being, they don't feel it because they've got a nice thick duffel coat on or something, whatever it might be. So if you're hypersensitive to touch, for example, or you can't stand the noise of somebody masticating next to you, then we make sure we move away from the fast food area, all of those sorts of things. And it goes back to having that understanding and awareness of all of the things that we might be able to change in the environment in order to reduce levels of arousal, sensory arousal in a negative way. And on balance then is what I get out of going to that sporting event, does that outweigh the difficulties that I might encounter? And I could carry on, but one of the things that I think is really, really important is always making sure, by always, I mean, as often as is humanly possible, that there's an escape route, so that there's always the opportunity to go, that's it, I need to be out of there. Because if you don't have that and you're exposed, that might be it forever then. That might be such a traumatic experience. Like, well, that's it. I've tried it once. It didn't work once. I'm never doing it again. As opposed to, well, I only tried half of it and then I had to remove myself. But that means I've still got those opportunities in the future to re-engage when it suits me. So always having those. And the other thing is like having what people call meltdowns or shutdowns. So often the onus of responsibility is on you as the autistic person. I hate that. Nobody has a meltdown on purpose. They're horrible things to have. You feel bad enough about yourself anyway to then subsequently somehow get the blame, or it's like you shouldn't have done that, or you should try not to do that in the future. No. This is a reaction to a distressing situation that you have no control over. So that kind of blame at following the event, if something did go wrong, we've got to get rid of that. We've got to eradicate that kind of concept.
Those two examples that you just provided, when I put it into the context of a neurotypical person versus a neurodiverse person, neurotypical people are always, not always, but most of the time, given the right of assent. Do I want to be a part of this? Do I want to participate? Can I say no? Those things have always been a right to neurotypical people. And somehow we've forgotten that this is a right for everybody. So for neurodiverse people, we oftentimes forget about the ability to be able to assent to something. And instead is that you're saying, you have to be forced, you have to complete it, you have to go through this. And I think that is a mind shift change that has occurred slowly, and we're not quite there yet. But it's something that we need to look at.
I'm sorry, no, I just want to, it's in my head, because I would always advocate for the onus of responsibility to be on the environment, not the autistic person. So I don't know what it's like in the States. Certainly here in the UK, we've got, for example, clubs, we've got rugby clubs who have got sensory friendly environments, so you can go to the match and be in a quiet. I am lucky enough to be part of, or last year was part of our inaugural alternative graduation ceremony for our students. So if going to graduation ceremony is not for you, for whatever reason, overwhelmed, whatever, we'll provide an alternative one. And we've got somebody coming this year with their dog. You know, you don't have to wear a gown, you don't even have to go up on stage, you can even not be there in the room, you can have it live streamed in a quiet room while you're sat on a beanbag or whatever. So I would always say, look, how can we replicate a similar experience without any distress at all by changing the environment? And then people say, well, what's so different? Well, the whole point is the person is neurodivergent. That is the whole point. And this is why I get so frustrated when you've got people that say, oh, no, your child needs to understand that they've got to live in the real world. Chief, listen to me. This is the real world for this individual. And you wouldn't have that onus responsibility on anybody else to say, well, you just have to put up with it. You just have to put up with this trauma on a day-to-day basis. Like, no, I wouldn't choose to do that in a million years. Well, nor should you inflict that on the autistic person, I don't think.
Yeah, and I mean, you mentioned sporting clubs, and there are in the States the same sort of thing where they have sensory-friendly environments. They're informed by the community, as far as the autistic community and those that are supporters of the autistic community, on how to make those environments appropriate for somebody to have that game day experience. They also have done it at restaurants and things like that, because, you know, you shouldn't be excluded from a restaurant simply because you don't like the peripheral noise or the lighting in the restaurant or things like that, is that restaurants have learned to be able to be open to a variety of people. If sporting and restaurants are able to do it, why wouldn't other environments be able to take on some of those same little changes that they could make to create a more welcoming environment? Do you talk to community members that way, as far as helping them to understand what you can do?
Jeff, I'll talk to any poor person that is willing to listen. I'm doing some work at the moment around green spaces, parks, and things like that. How to make those more neurodivergent friendly. I've just finished writing a book. It's not out yet. Oh, there's a section about about the best restaurant experience for an autistic person, just from the perspective of an autistic individual, just one person. But it's even things like, so I've come up with this concept called autistic courtesy. So your audience might be one of the first to hear about this. So at the moment, and you're a parent, I may be wrong, but it's so much of your life is, can you do this for my child? My child needs this. We need this adjustment. We need this change. We need this accommodation. autistic people themselves, like going into employment, going into whatever, saying, yeah, but I really do need my own quiet space. I really need to wear my headphones at work. I really do need it. If we've got an agenda for the meeting, I really need you to stick to the agenda. Can we keep the time? Whatever. It's always that I've got to ask to have my needs met. Compared to what I call the predominant neurotype, most people go through life never having to ask for accommodations because it's all just laid out for them. And I think that puts the autistic individual in a very vulnerable position, because lots of autistic people hate putting themselves in the spotlight, hate having to ask for things, feel like they're inferior or a problem or a pain in the arse or whatever it might be. We came up with the concept of autistic courtesy, whereby, as far as we can, we will make those accommodations before we even meet you. So this restaurant was just a little exemplar of that. And it's like, well, we understand that you've come to our booking system. We welcome you to bring your own utensils, for example. We welcome that if you need to pre-order food, we welcome the fact that you need to eat at 3 o'clock in the morning in the dark or by candlelight with nobody else there. These are all options that are available to you. And by doing that, you find the population for the first time ever feels heard before having to ask. And it breaks my heart, because every single autistic person that I've spoken to about this has said, you're the first person I've ever heard talk about autistic courtesy, which makes me think the flip side is nobody else is doing it. So most people are going through their entire lives without being afforded just basic courtesy. And yet it's not that difficult to do, I think.
No, it's not, but it oftentimes takes the story to connect to. It takes understanding and experience to say, yes, I can do this, or I can change the way that my particular community interacts, but it takes that moment of connecting to it. Are there stories, are there personal stories where you've seen successes of the community doing this? You mentioned the restaurant, but where somebody has been challenged on a particular event their entire life, and then finally there was a community or an opportunity where somebody was taking their sensory needs into account that changed the entire dynamic?
Well, I mean, I can only really speak from my experience at the university, for example. So I'm in a fortunate position, like it blows my mind how lucky I am, how fortunate I am to be part of a course where often the cohorts we have, the majority population are autistic themselves. I don't know how many other course leaders in the whole world can say that. But what that means is I can really push the agenda of autistic courtesy. So, for example, I will send out screencasts to my students before I've ever laid eyes on them, before we've ever met, and said, and I can say things like, nobody's going to ask you a question in front of the group. You don't have to stand up and talk in front of anybody else. There'll be no icebreakers. You can do these things if you choose to, but there's going to be no requisite of doing that. If you don't want to do group work, you can work autodidactically. If you can't write an essay, you can do a presentation instead. You can record yourself in the comfort of your own home and provide that as an alternative form of knowledge transfer. So all of these things, and all of a sudden I'm getting students saying, well, the only reason I'm on this course is because of that. I failed at university, or I dropped out of university because people just wouldn't accommodate what I needed. I've had a student in the past for whom, from a sensory perspective, really disliked being anywhere near a person. Like, so sitting in a lecture theatre is just not possible. All it takes is an A4 sheet of paper that says reserved on it. And I say, or two, sorry, one at the end of the aisle and the other one adjacent to that. This is your seat. This is the other reserved seat. Nobody bats an eyelid thinking, where's that person? So every single lecture, that student knows they don't have to sit next to anybody. That is a difference between graduating and dropping out of higher education. Like something as simple as that.
Yep.
And there's any number of examples from a sensory point. Even say, a fairly recent cohort is like, no, I need to sit on my own at the back. It's absolutely fine. I knew this beforehand. There's a table, one person table, again reserved, sat right at the back in the corner. That is that. All of a sudden, you've got a teaching space that, for the first time, bearing in mind this is a postgraduate course, so a lot of my students, maybe the education system has already failed them, and then all of a sudden they come on a course like this, and all of a sudden they're learning without any problem at all, because of this level of, well, this is absolutely fine. This is just completely normalized that we do things slightly differently. And the attraction of that and the benefits of that to everybody are insurmountable. Not insurmountable, they're just extraordinary to witness, really are.
Yeah. And the way that you describe autistic courtesy, it seems so simple, but one of the things that, and even when I self-reflect, one of the things that might stop me from doing something is I don't know how to do it. So something like autistic courtesy or other ways to be able to integrate other strategies into your daily life, where can somebody turn to find some of these, maybe not manuals, but guides on how to be able to adapt appropriately to be able to be more inclusive?
The word inclusive is a fantastic question. And it's hugely problematic, because if there was such a guide, it would already be written and everybody would be following it. But of course, when you take into account the heterogeneity of the population, the individuality of the population, what might work perfectly well in terms of autistic courtesy for one individual might be diametrically opposite to somebody else. So there's limits to how much you can do for the entire population. But being aware that this is something that should be done in the first place often allows the population itself, then the autistic population, to go, actually, you're a trusted human, as opposed to you're yet another one for whom I'm going to disengage. So even having the understanding that things by definition will need to be different. I think I like my little mantras and sayings, but basically I'm of the opinion, I may be wrong, I'm of the opinion that anything that works effectively for the predominant neurotype, we at least need to contemplate the possibility of changing it to make it as suitable for the autistic individual. Now, again, rhetorical question, but in daily life, how much of practice, as in how we communicate, how we operate, how we socialize, how we do everything for the majority of the population, how much of that is ever challenged to the point of saying, do we need to do things slightly different for somebody who isn't in that demographic bell curve? They're at the periphery of that. And if that isn't happening, then we're being exclusionary, not inclusionary. Now, I think you could ask me, say, right, can you give me a list of your inclusive practice for your postgraduate certificate? And I'd say, okay, well, I do this. However, you can't just go and implement that and go, right, I'm being inclusive, because I think inclusivity is a culture rather than a set of practices. A set of practices is obviously part of it, but actually it's a cultural thing.
Yeah.
In terms of, it's perfectly reasonable to lie on the floor when I'm teaching. I actively encourage it, because I know that you lying on the floor is going to make you more receptive to learning. So if I'm a teacher, my job is to teach as effectively as possible, which means you need to be in a position where you can learn as effectively as possible. So if you need to sit and rock on that chair, or even have a rocking chair, or a beanbag, or sit in the corner or whatever, then that's not just accepted, it's proactively encouraged and embraced. Now, there aren't very many environments that are like that, but the more we get like that, the more work environments, more school environments, yes, of course you can, I don't know, make sure that there's access to a guinea pig out in you call it recess, don't you, break time or whatever, so that you can go and regulate yourself by rubbing your face up against a lovely guinea pig. I mean, of course, yeah, spot on, absolutely 100%. And that's just perfectly accepted right across the board. All of a sudden, you've got families and individuals who are able to then say, that's amazing, you are a trusted community, I'm going to engage rather than disengage.
Mm-hmm. But a lot of people have already been beaten down. I mean, you mentioned even some of the students that you have already gone through the education system, probably have developed ways to cope with the environment simply because they weren't listened to, or they weren't given the chance to be able to engage in the sensory profiles that they need. So what advice would you give to autistic individuals right now who maybe have not felt listened to for a long time, or feel like, hey, you know what, I really wanted to engage in these sensory activities, but I don't feel like anybody's ever supported me?
That's a tough one to answer. Like, I like being asked questions about autism rather than the rest of the population that I don't necessarily understand as well. Because we should all be doing this, like, just as part of being human, but we're not. And I don't necessarily understand why we're not. Like when people say, oh yeah, but making all those adaptation changes for one person, you're not making it for one person. You're making it for every individual that might require that for the rest of time. So why, like, it's not, it really isn't rocket science. I have written, I've written a sensory framework, which is actually directed, it's a set of questions to autistic adults, but it can be used for autistic kids or for whatever, or carers or parents. And that's freely available on my blog, I think. Well, no, I don't think. Well, why am I saying I think? I know for a fact it is. As a starting point to get those conversations started. So I like, and actually having the onus away from you as the autistic person and go, right, well, there's this framework. Let's, as a group, let's work out what all of our sensory differences might be, because they're all going to be different. It's just the autistic person is perhaps more extreme than the non-autistic person. And actually everybody having some agency and autonomy and authenticity. Like those 3 A's, I think are absolutely gorgeous. And I think it starts right from the beginning. And I feel so passionately about this, and this isn't just a sensory thing, it goes right across the board around autistic authenticity, and that's understanding of self. If you are an autistic person and you don't know you're autistic, or you do know you're autistic but you don't actually know what that means to you, how are you ever going to make decisions that are pertinent to you? And I think what people do, by even if they know they're autistic but they don't really know what that means, is they continually make decisions based on parameters that aren't applicable to them. It's like, okay, well, they do it all in that way, so I need to do it that way. I need to have this kind of relationship. I need to have friends in this way because everybody says that's what leads to good quality of life. Actually, it might be different. It goes back to what I was saying. Like, if that's how it works for most people, we probably need to translate it and tweak it to make it suitable for the autistic or neurodivergent individual. But having that knowledge for yourself provides an enormous amount of armor against the rest of the world, so you don't go down that road of self-blame from a very early age, which not only but often then leads to longer term trauma. So I think it really starts from educating everybody about not about autism, but what autism really is, as opposed to what the rhetoric currently is. So yeah, buy and read all of my books.
Well, I mean, I would love to be able to point everybody in the right direction, but before you give us all of that information on your books, research, upcoming talks, I do want to reiterate the idea of the framework. I love that thought process. It's not about a single event of accommodation or a single event of trying to make somebody's sensory experience valued. It's about a framework of how can I apply this to everybody in my life? How can I apply this across the board to be able to be more human? So I love the way that you put that into perspective. And I just learned some things. I want everybody else to kind of go through the same process of being able to learn and being able to open up their thoughts on, oh, you know what, maybe I can be a better version of myself and start to expand opportunities for others at the same time. Where can they get your books, research, upcoming talks?
I genuinely, I know, I just write them and then I kind of leave it to everybody else. They are published in America. I know they are, and I do know that because I had to meet a publication date or a deadline, sorry, to make sure that Amazon in the States could stock my books in time. So I'm fairly sure. I'm sure there are other places available. I know Amazon UK sells all of them, and you can get Audible. I've done 2 as Audible books as well that I've narrated. I'd prefer to do more, but they cost money, unfortunately. But yeah, I'm fairly sure you can get them. I'm more than happy for people to contact me directly, as long as they don't send me horrible messages. I'm a very sensitive human being. But if anybody wanted to contact me directly, if they were struggling. In terms of talks, I speak at conferences all around the world, and I never really know what I'm doing from one day to the next. So I'm the last person to ask, just to keep an eye out for local events, I guess.
Well, we'll definitely provide the links that we can to the material, and I will say is that they definitely are available on Amazon, because I was looking at it just this past week and seeing all of the work that you've been doing. But Dr. Beardon, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your experience, sharing your knowledge with us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for listening to Autism Weekly. We hope you tune back in next week to learn more about autism in the real world. Autism Weekly is now found on all the major listening apps, including Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, Amazon Music, and more. Subscribe to be notified when we post a new podcast. Autism Weekly is produced by ABS Kids. ABS Kids is proud to provide diagnostic assessments and ABA therapy to children with developmental delays like autism spectrum disorder. You can learn more about ABS Kids and the Autism Weekly podcast by visiting abskids.com. Thanks for tuning in. See you again next week.